Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, another flip during and after our kind of strange virtual class thing that we had set up, but it's so exciting that I'm going to be able to be back with y'all on Monday. I'm really looking forward to it. Definitely be able to hop on a RimWeb pretty soon. Make sure you're checking for your test grades and stuff because those are going to be going in the next couple of hours and everything like that. So making sure that you know that those are going in and all that stuff. But just wanted to go ahead and say, I know that this unit already seems intense. I know that it seems really intense. I know we've already talked about Charles and Philip. And you know what? Actually, hold on. Let's back up a little bit and let's kind of review everything that we've already talked about. Yeah, so we talked about so far Charles V, right? Make sure you know that. We talked about those Habsburgs. We talked about him splitting his family in half, retiring, giving half to Philip, giving half to his brother and all that stuff. And then we spent most of this whole time talking about Philip II and his rise to prominence, right? How he marries Bloody Mary and how their whole relationship kind of bottoms out. Make sure you look over that stuff and study it again, okay? But now we're moving into his relationship with Elizabeth, okay? So picking up right where we left off, he ends up supporting Elizabeth, right? He supports Elizabeth's reign or ascension to the throne mainly for one giant reason. There's this woman that lives in Scotland, and her name is Mary, Queen of Scots. And he supports Elizabeth's rise to the throne because if Mary inherits the throne, he's going to be really upset about this because Mary is pro-France. So originally, Philip was very gung-ho about Elizabeth becoming the Queen of England. And he was like, hey, let's get married. And she says no. But what ends up blowing up in his face is that Elizabeth actually ends up allying with the Dutch. Now, y'all don't know this yet, but what's happening inside of Philip's kingdom is he's supposed to be the king of the Netherlands, and the Netherlands is revolting against him. The Netherlands is in the middle of this thing called the 80 Years' War. They're revolting against Philip to try and actually get as much power and dominance as they can so they can create their own East India Company and they can make their money and go into their golden age, right? So what ends up going down, though, is that instead of actually helping Philip destroy the Dutch, Elizabeth allied with the Dutch, right? Philip becomes furious by this. He becomes enraged because he's trying to keep the Dutch underneath his thumb, and he's now so mad that Elizabeth is allied with the Dutch that he decides he's going to do something that every leader shouldn't do, okay? For the rest of your existence, if any of you ever become, like a dictator of Europe, okay, there's two things you don't do, all right? One, you never invade Russia on land, okay? Just don't do it. Promise? Do not invade Russia, and especially not during the winter. Napoleon, Hitler, way to go, dum-dums. Now, also, another big thing you don't do, don't try to invade England via the water, all right? So never, ever try to launch a naval invasion of England because you'll always end up losing Napoleon and Philip. Because the big event that ends up happening is Philip, enraged by Elizabeth's alliance with the Dutch, enraged by the fact that he's no longer the King of England, enraged by the fact that the Dutch are literally revolting against him, he decides to launch this thing called the Spanish Armada, which happens in 1588, and it's one of the most famous examples of history that has ever occurred in European history, period, right? The Spanish Armada is a pivotal turning point because the English seemed heavily outmatched, right? Now, to give you an understanding, the belligerents of this fight had kind of equal number of vessels, right? The Spanish showed up with over 130 ships. The English had close to that amount. Most of the English ships, though, were merchant vessels were outfitted with cannons, and they had about 30-something warships, right? But the Spanish had over 20 galleons, right? And this right here is a Spanish galleon. The Spanish galleons were far larger than English warships, and they each of them had close to 60 cannons mounted, 30 on one side, 30 on the other. So when a Spanish galleon pulled up next to you and they were about to have a naval engagement, they could let off 30 shots of a cannon at your boat, effectively probably sinking it, or at least wounding your vessel to the point to where it can't fight anymore. So nobody wanted to try and fight Spanish galleons in the water. Elizabeth is worried about this. Elizabeth is nervous about this entire thing. And so what ends up going forward, though, is that actually Elizabeth hires a pirate to help her out, right? And with a little bit of luck and this pirate's help, she ends up winning the Spanish Armada, okay? So the English are going to end up winning with the use of fire ships and, like I said, getting a little bit lucky. What ends up going down is that Elizabeth hires a pirate by the name of Sir Francis Drake. And Sir Francis Drake comes up with a plan. And he's like, okay, we're going to try and force the Spanish to go around us and keep going to the north towards Scotland and Ireland. We're going to lure them into some like small bays and things like that where our lighter, smaller, and more maneuverable ships can get around the big, bulky galleons and push them out, right? What a genius idea. What a great concept behind this entire thing. So smart, right? And then also on top of it, Sir Francis Drake comes up with another idea, and he says we're going to use these things called fire ships, right? Fire ships is where they took old, broken down English vessels and set them on fire and would launch them at the Spanish galleons to try and cause confusion and melee, right? And then on top of that, as the Spanish continued to try and go all the way around England, let me pull up a map really quick. So England map D maps, okay? So like I'll show you really, really fast. Okay, here we go. Images. There we go. Here we go. All right, so like if we're looking at this map right here of England real fast, you'll actually see exactly what I'm talking about. So what ended up happening is Philip's boats came in through this area right here, right through the English Channel. So Francis Drake lured them into this area, and since the Spanish galleons were so big, the English drafted around them on all sides and used those fire ships, and the Spanish had to turn and run, right? Now, while they were turning and running, they had a plan. They were like, oh, we're going to sail all the way around Scotland and come all the way around down this side, and we'll land in Ireland. Why did the Spanish want to land in Ireland? Because Ireland's Catholic. Spain is Catholic. They're like, okay, we'll recruit an army right here, and then we'll launch a land invasion directly this way. Problem is, though, is on the way around, their food started spoiling right here. They hit a massive set of storms on the backside of Scotland that sank half of the Spanish Armada, so they never even got the chance to land in Ireland, so defeated, they had to return to Spain, and Elizabeth, the Queen of England, one of the most intense rulers of all time, has defeated the largest naval presence in the world at the time. Look at Elizabeth go in her victory portrait while she's like, yeah, no big deal. I just destroyed that entire fleet because I'm awesome, right? So Elizabeth destroys them, and then because of that, the Spanish power begins to decline, right? Now, during Philip's reign, though, Spain was going through a golden age of art literature, right? So just to understand, during this time period, before Spain loses the Spanish Armada and their power begins to decline pretty steadily during the 1600s, they were going through a massive, massive era of growth in art. You've got guys like Greco and Velázquez, who were very, very famous painters during this time period, who actually showed up and did a lot of very famous work in the Baroque art realm, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Now, the thing about it, like this, for example, is the death of Charles V. This is a portrait by Velázquez, and this right here, or no, that's by Greco, and this right here is by Velázquez. It's called Las Meninas, which is actually a very famous painting that we'll talk about a little bit later on in class as well. And then also, Cervantes was a very, very famous writer who wrote a book called Don Quixote, right? And in Don Quixote, it's this famous story about chivalry and about the process forward of chivalrous knights and all of these other things and romanticizing the Middle Ages. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well too, and how this entire thing is like a little old man charging in a windmill that he thinks is a giant, right? Now going forward though, Spain's power is steadily going to decline in the 1600s after the Spanish Armada. Now the Spanish Armada happened in 1588, and by the 1630s, Spain's power is in the toilet, right? So like, and a lot of that is because of inflation, the Spanish Inquisition, and the Dutch, right? So like now looking at these big ideas and these big causes, inflation's happening because their money is losing value, right? So Spanish currency is tremendously going down in value due to the excessive amount of gold and silver that is being brought in through the ports from the Americas. Now some of you are like, wait a minute, if you have a lot more money, how can you have too much money? Well, the problem with this is because Spain had kind of devalued manual labor, and they had also ran a bunch of people out. And due to this entire thing, they bought a lot of foreign products, right? And since they bought so many foreign products, the gold that they're bringing in is being paid out to other countries in the form of imported goods, right? So on top of all of that, the Spanish Inquisition was really biting Philip in like biting him back, right? The Spanish Inquisition was a program that was launched by his grandmother or great-grandmother and great-grandfather, the grandparents of Charles V, Isabella and Ferdinand. Isabella and Ferdinand launched this program called the Spanish Inquisition long before Philip was ever even alive, and this was to banish all non-Catholics from Spain, particularly Jewish people and particularly Muslim people. Now, the thing about it is that the Jewish and Muslim populations of Spain did certain trades and product making that many other people did not. For example, jewelry making, banking, law office, like being lawyers, doctors, and these other kinds of fields of work. And since they've now been banished out of Spain, this negatively affected their economy, sending people to further results of actually purchasing other things from different places. So this tanked their economy, and the Spanish Inquisition shows why you shouldn't be so rude to people of other religions, right? But also on top of everything else, the Dutch are heavily revolting against the Spanish. And since they're revolting against the Spanish with the help of the English, this caused massive Spanish debt. And that's a big reason why you don't hear about Spain as much anymore in the long run. But all of this stuff, as you can see, during the late 1600s, Europe is in a crisis. You're going to see things like the English Civil War, the Spanish Armada, the wars of religion. But the thing about it is we're going to now pivot, and when we get back into class, when I see y'all next time, we're going to start talking about the English Civil War and a bunch of other really, really cool stuff about that. I got a great story to tell y'all in class about an execution. It's absolutely wild, but I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.